What if the world you know has ended before? What if beneath the streets where you walk, beneath the cities where millions live and work and dream, there lie the ruins of other worlds, other ages, other versions of humanity that rose to greatness and then vanished so completely that we do not even remember their names? In the deserts of southern Turkey, where the sun bakes the earth until it cracks, where the wind carries dust that might once have been temples, there stands a hill that should not exist. For 11,000 years it waited, silent, buried, forgotten. When archaeologists finally broke through the surface in 1994, they found massive stone pillars arranged in perfect circles. Each pillar weighed more than 10 tons. Each one was carved with intricate images of animals that no longer walk the earth. Foxes, scorpions, serpents, vultures with outstretched wings. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. It is older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than writing, agriculture, pottery, or any form of civilization we were taught to recognize. It was built 6,000 years before the Sumerians pressed the first words into wet clay. And yet the people who constructed it possessed knowledge of engineering, astronomy, and symbolic thought that rivals our own. They built it. And then, for reasons we still do not understand, they buried it. Deliberately, completely, as if they wanted to hide it from what was coming next. This is not the only site. Across the earth, beneath oceans and jungles and sand, archaeologists have found structures that do not fit the timeline we were given in school. Temples older than farming, cities swallowed by the sea, stones cut with such precision that modern engineers cannot explain how they were shaped. And everywhere the same pattern, sudden appearance, brief flourishing, then silence. The fossil record tells a similar story. 5 times in the last half-billion years, life on Earth has been nearly erased, not gradually. Not slowly, but suddenly. In geological terms, almost instantly. Entire ecosystems vanished. Species that had thrived for millions of years disappeared within centuries, sometimes within decades. The Earth reset. And then from the ashes and the mud and the few survivors that remained, life began again. But here is what makes them strange. Here is what archaeologists whisper about in quiet university offices and what geologists see in stone layers they cannot fully explain. The destruction is not random, it follows a rhythm, a pattern, as if the earth itself breathes in cycles, creation, collapse, renewal, over and over again. And if that rhythm is real, if the evidence carved into stone and pressed into clay and written in the bones of vanished creatures is accurate, then we are not the first. We are not the pioneers. We are not the beginning. We are the latest in a long line of worlds that rose and fell before us. Before we go further into the ruins, before we trace the fingerprints of lost ages across continents and centuries, take a moment. If you are drawn to this kind of history, the kind that refuses to fit neatly into textbooks, the kind that sleeps between geology and myth, consider subscribing to this channel. Press the like button if mysteries like this pull at something deep inside you. Let the algorithm know that there are still people who want to ask uncomfortable questions. And if you are still here, if you are listening in the dark somewhere or during a long drive or as you drift towards sleep, leave a comment. Tell me where you are in the world right now. Tell me what hour you are keeping. Tell me whether you believe it, whether you believe that humanity has risen and fallen before. Whether you think we are the first to ask these questions or merely the latest to remember them. I want to imagine this story unfolding across time zones, carried softly into bedrooms in Tokyo and Berlin and Cairo and Sao Paulo, whispered across distances by voices separated by oceans but connected by the same ancient curiosity, the same need to know where we came from and whether we have been here before. Because if we have, if the earth has been destroyed and reborn not once but many times, then everything changes. Our history becomes longer, our memory becomes deeper, and the question is no longer where did we come from, but how many times have we forgotten? The first clue lies not in ancient texts or prophetic visions or myths passed down by firelight. The first clue lies in something older than language itself, something that cannot be rewritten or mistranslated or dismissed as imagination. The first clue lies in stone, in layers of rock that stretch back hundreds of millions of years, in sediment that records the rise and fall of climates, in fossils pressed into limestone like photographs from an age before cameras. The Earth remembers, even when we do not. The Earth keeps a record written in geology. A record that shows again and again the same terrifying truth. This world has ended before, not once, not twice, but over and over across the vastness of time, and each time it ended, something new began, something that did not remember what came before, something that had to start over from the beginning. We call these moments extinctions, but that word is too clinical, too sterile. It hides the violence, the sudden totality, the way the sky itself must have darkened, the way the oceans boiled or froze, the way mountains rose where valleys had been. The way life, which had spent millions of years learning how to survive, was erased in a single breath. And yet life came back. It always comes back, smaller at first, cautious, but persistent. And within a few million years, sometimes less, the world was full again. Different creatures, different climates, different rules, but full. What if humanity is part of that same pattern? What if we too have risen before, built cities and monuments and systems of knowledge, only to be swept away by forces we could not control? What if the ruins we are now uncovering are not the remains of primitive ancestors fumbling toward civilization, but the last traces of worlds as complex as our own? That is the question this story asks, not whether the Earth has been destroyed. We know it has, the evidence is undeniable, but whether humanity or something like humanity was there to witness it, to survive it, to remember it just long enough to leave a warning carved in stone. The wind moves across Göbekli Tepe in the mornings. It carries the scent of wild thyme and dust. The stones stand in silence, their carvings still sharp after 11,000 years. And if you stand there long enough, if you place your hand on the cool limestone and feel the weight of all that time pressing down, you begin to understand. These stones were not built to celebrate the beginning. They were built to remember the ending that came before, the ending that might come again. And so we begin our descent, not into myth, not into speculation, but into evidence, into the geological testimony of a planet that has died and been reborn more times than we can count, into the archaeological mystery of structures that should not exist, into the myths that are too consistent to be coincidence, into the possibility, strange and unsettling and undeniable, that the world you know has ended before, and that you are living in the age that comes after. The Earth does not lie, it cannot. Unlike myths that change with each retelling, unlike histories rewritten by conquerors, unlike memories that fade with time, the Earth preserves truth in layers. Stone does not forget. Sediment does not invent. Fossils do not exaggerate. When geologists drill into the ground, when they pull up cores of rock from beneath ice sheets or ocean floors or desert plains, they are reading a book written over billions of years, page by page, layer by layer. And in that book, written in the language of minerals and isotopes and compressed organic matter, the same chapter appears again and again. The chapter of ending, not gradual decline, not slow erosion, but sudden catastrophic termination. Moments when the rules of existence changed overnight. When the climate shifted so violently that ecosystems collapsed within decades. When the sky darkened for years. When the oceans turned acidic. When volcanic eruptions covered entire continents in ash. When impacts from space struck with the force of 1 billion nuclear weapons. These events are not theoretical. They are not debated. Every geologist on Earth agrees they happened. The only questions that remain are how often, how severe, and whether intelligent life was present to witness them. Let us begin with what we know for certain. In the last 540 million years since complex life first emerged from the oceans and began its long experiment on land, the Earth has experienced 5 mass extinction events. 5 moments when life itself nearly ended. Scientists call them the Big Five. The first occurred 443 million years ago at the end of the Ordovician period. The cause is still uncertain. Perhaps a gamma ray burst from a dying star thousands of light years away. Perhaps a sudden ice age triggered by volcanic winter. Whatever the reason, 85% of all species vanished. The oceans, which had been full of strange armored creatures and early fish, became graveyards. Entire ecosystems dissolved. The second extinction came 375 million years ago during the late Devonian period. This one unfolded in waves over several million years. Ocean oxygen levels collapsed. Reef systems died. Fish populations crashed. 75% of species disappeared. The fossil record shows layers of black shale, oxygen-starved sediment that speaks of seas gone dead. The third extinction happened 352 million years ago at the boundary between the Carboniferous and Permian periods. Volcanic activity on a scale we have never witnessed blanketed the atmosphere in sulfur and ash. 70% of terrestrial species and 83% of marine genera were lost. The world that emerged afterward was unrecognizable. The fourth extinction is the one that haunts geology. It is called the Great Dying. It occurred 252 million years ago at the end of the Permian period, and it nearly ended everything. Imagine standing on the coast of what would one day become Siberia. The year is 252 million years before the present. Beneath your feet, the ground trembles, not from an earthquake, from something worse. The largest volcanic event in Earth's history is beginning. Magma is forcing its way through the crust across an area the size of Europe. Lava floods the landscape, but the lava is not the worst part. The worst part is the gas, carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur dioxide, pouring into the atmosphere in quantities so vast they alter the chemistry of the air itself. The temperature rises, first by 5 degrees, then 10, then 15, the oceans warm, the oxygen in the water disappears, hydrogen sulfide, a poison, bubbles up from the deep. The sky turns green with toxic clouds, on land forests ignite, rivers dry up, animals suffocate. In the oceans, coral reefs dissolve, fish die by the billions, shellfish cannot form their shells, the food chain collapses from the bottom up. 96% of all marine species disappear, 70% of terrestrial vertebrates vanish, 83% of insect species are lost. It is the only mass extinction in history that nearly wiped out insects, creatures so resilient they survive almost everything. For 5 million years, the Earth remains nearly barren. A hot, poisoned wasteland where only the hardiest microbes and a few small reptiles cling to existence. Life does not flourish, it endures, barely, and then slowly it recovers. New species evolve, the world refills, dinosaurs emerge, forests return, the oceans teem again with life. By 66 million years ago, the Earth is green and lush and full of creatures that have never known the Great Dying. Creatures that believe the world has always been this way, stable, predictable, safe. And then the sky catches fire. The fifth extinction is the one we know best, the one that ended the age of dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, an asteroid 10 kilometers wide struck the coast of what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released energy equivalent to 10 billion atomic bombs. The explosion vaporized rock and sent a plume of superheated debris into the stratosphere. Within hours, flaming ejecta rained down across the entire planet, igniting wildfires on every continent. The sky darkened, not for days, for years. Photosynthesis stopped, plants died. Herbivores starved, carnivores followed. 75% of all species went extinct. The dinosaurs, which had ruled the Earth for 160 million years, vanished in less than a century. Geologists can see the moment it happened. In rock layers around the world, there is a thin line of clay. It is called the KT boundary. Below it, fossils of dinosaurs are abundant. Above it, nothing. Just the bones of small mammals and birds and crocodiles, the survivors. The clay itself contains iridium, a rare metal uncommon on Earth but abundant in asteroids. It is the signature of impact, the proof that something from space ended an age. But these 5 extinctions, as catastrophic as they were, occurred millions of years ago, long before humans, long before civilization. Long before anything resembling us walked the earth, or so we are told, there is another extinction, a sixth. It does not appear in most textbooks because it is too recent, too uncomfortable, too close to the beginning of human history. It is called the Younger Dryas event, and it happened 12,800 years ago. The Earth at that time was emerging from the last ice age. Glaciers were retreating, temperatures were rising. Grasslands spread across continents that had been frozen for millennia. Massive animals roamed these grasslands: mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths the size of elephants, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, short-faced bears standing 12 feet tall. Humans were there too, not many. Perhaps a few million scattered across the Americas, Europe, Asia, Africa. They lived in small groups, they hunted, they gathered, they painted images on cave walls, they told stories by firelight, and then suddenly the climate collapsed. In less than a decade, temperatures plunged. The glaciers, which had been melting, surged forward again. Ice sheets that had retreated hundreds of miles re-advanced. Summers turned cold, winters became unbearable, the grasslands died, the herds died with them. Within 1,000 years, 35 genera of large mammals went extinct in North America alone. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, camels, horses, saber-toothed cats, all gone. Europe lost its megafauna. Asia saw populations crash. Human populations collapsed as well. Archaeological sites that had been continuously occupied for thousands of years were abandoned. For over a century, scientists debated the cause. Some blamed human overhunting, others suggested disease. A few proposed rapid climate change, but none of these explanations fit the evidence completely. The extinctions happened too quickly, too globally, too uniformly. In 2007, a team of researchers led by Richard Firestone, Alan West, and James Kennett proposed a controversial hypothesis. They suggested that the Younger Dryas was triggered by a comet impact. Not a single impact, multiple fragments from a disintegrating comet striking the Earth in a cosmic barrage. They pointed to a layer of sediment dated to exactly 12,800 years ago. This layer appears across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. It contains bizarre materials: nanodiamonds formed only under extreme heat and pressure, magnetic spherules, tiny glassy particles created by vaporized rock, iridium, the same asteroid signature found at the KT boundary, carbon spherules, evidence of massive wildfires, and a black mat, a layer of organic material suggesting sudden ecosystem collapse. Mainstream archaeology resisted. The idea seemed too catastrophic, too convenient. Critics argued the evidence was contaminated or misinterpreted, but more studies followed. In 2012, researchers found shocked quartz in Younger Dryas sediments. Shocked quartz forms only during meteorite impacts or nuclear explosions. In 2013, a study confirmed the presence of melt glass across 4 continents, all dated to the same narrow window. In 2018, scientists discovered a massive crater beneath the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland, 31 kilometers wide, consistent with a large impact around the right time period. The evidence kept accumulating. The hypothesis became harder to dismiss. If the Younger Dryas was caused by impact, it means that 12,000 years ago, at the very dawn of civilization, the Earth was struck by fragments of a comet large enough to ignite continental wildfires, trigger a climate catastrophe, and drive dozens of species to extinction. And humans survived it, barely, in caves, in scattered refuges, clinging to life as the world burned and then froze. When the climate finally stabilized 11,600 years ago, agriculture appeared, almost immediately, in multiple places: the Fertile Crescent, the Indus Valley, China, Mesoamerica. As if humanity, traumatized by near extinction, decided never to rely on hunting and gathering again. But what if civilization had existed before the impact? What if the survivors were not primitive hunter-gatherers learning agriculture for the first time, but refugees from a more complex world that had been destroyed? That is the question geology forces us to ask. Because the deeper we dig, the more we find that does not fit. Every ancient culture on Earth preserves a memory of the flood, not a local flood, the one that divided time into before and after. The Sumerians wrote of it in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis. The Hebrews recorded it in Genesis. The Greeks told of Deucalion's flood. The Hindus described Manu's deluge. The Chinese preserved stories of Gun Yu and the Great Flood. The Maya spoke of water destroying previous worlds. Australian Aboriginals recount the rising of the seas. Polynesian traditions remember islands swallowed by waves. Over 200 cultures across every inhabited continent tell the same story. Water rose. The world drowned, a few survived. Humanity began again. For centuries, scholars dismissed these as myth, religious allegory, exaggerated memories of local river floods, but geology tells a different story. At the end of the last ice age, between 15,000 and 7,000 years ago, global sea levels rose by 120 meters. Not gradually, in surges. Massive ice sheets covering North America, Europe, and Asia melted. The water had to go somewhere. It went into the oceans. Coastlines where humans had lived for thousands of years vanished beneath the waves. River valleys flooded. Entire landscapes drowned. And because humans, like all creatures, prefer to live near water, the majority of human settlements at that time would have been along coasts and rivers. Those settlements are now underwater. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, buried beneath silt on continental shelves around the world. In recent decades, marine archaeologists have begun finding them. Off the coast of India, near the city of Dwarka, divers discovered submerged stone structures, walls, and pottery dated to 7,500 years ago. Hindu texts describe Dwarka as the city of Krishna, swallowed by the sea. Near the Japanese island of Yonaguni, divers found a massive underwater formation with straight edges, right angles, and what appear to be terraces and staircases. Geologist Robert Schoch examined it and concluded that while the base rock is natural, it shows signs of human modification. The structure was above water 10,000 years ago. In the Mediterranean, archaeologists have mapped submerged ports, walls, and buildings off the coasts of Greece, Turkey, and Egypt. Some date to 5,000 years ago, others may be older. In 2001, researchers using sonar off the coast of Cuba detected symmetrical stone structures at a depth of 600 meters. The images showed what appeared to be roads and buildings. If confirmed, they would predate all known civilizations. The site remains unexplored due to depth and cost. These discoveries are not isolated anomalies. They are fragments of a drowned world. A world that existed when sea levels were lower, when the climate was different. When coastlines extended miles beyond where they are today. Graham Hancock, a researcher who has spent decades investigating these sites, argues that we are looking at the remnants of a lost maritime civilization. A culture that thrived along Ice Age coastlines and was destroyed when the ice melted. Mainstream archaeology resists this conclusion. They argue that humans 12,000 years ago were not capable of building stone structures or sailing across oceans. But the structures exist, the flood myths exist, the drowned coastlines exist, and increasingly the evidence suggests that something more complex than we have been taught was happening at the end of the Ice Age. Geology does not speculate, it measures, it dates, it records what happened and when. The rock record shows that the Earth has been destroyed multiple times. Some destructions were slow, unfolding over millions of years. Others were sudden, occurring within centuries or decades. The rock record shows that mass extinctions are not rare. They are part of the rhythm of the planet. The rock record shows that 12,000 years ago, something catastrophic happened. The climate collapsed. Megafauna died, human populations crashed, and when the world recovered, civilization appeared almost immediately. This is not myth, this is geology. The Earth remembers what we have forgot. It remembers the fires, the floods, the impacts, the volcanic winters, the moments when the sky darkened and the world ended. And it remembers that life came back, every time, smaller at first. Struggling, but persistent. which means that if humanity existed before the last great catastrophe, if we built cities and monuments and systems of knowledge, we could have survived. A few of us, in scattered refuges, carrying fragmented memories of what had been lost. And when the world stabilized, when the floodwaters receded and the skies cleared, we would have begun again. Not from zero, but from memory, from the knowledge that had survived. That is what the stones suggest. That is what the flood myths preserve. That is what the drowned coastlines whisper. The world you know has ended before. The earth remembers, even if we do not. And what those survivors left behind is not written in texts or myths. It is carved into stone monuments so precise, so advanced, so inexplicably ancient that they should not exist. But they do. In the summer heat of southern Turkey, where temperatures climb past 40 degrees Celsius and the landscape shimmers like water, there stands a hill that archaeologists call the 0 point of history. For 11,000 years it waited, buried, silent, forgotten beneath dust and wild grass. Local farmers walked over it for generations without knowing what lay beneath their feet. They called it Göbekli Tepe, which means Potbelly Hill in Turkish. An unremarkable name for a place that would rewrite everything we thought we understood about the beginning of civilization. In October 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt arrived at the site with a small team and permission to dig. What he found in the first week made him stop and stare in disbelief. Massive stone pillars, T-shaped, standing upright, arranged in circles, each one carved with intricate reliefs of animals, foxes with bushy tails, serpents coiled and ready to strike, scorpions with stingers raised, vultures spreading their wings, wild boars, gazelles, lions. The pillars were enormous. Some stood over 5 meters tall and weighed between 10 and 20 tons. They had been quarried from bedrock, shaped with stone tools, transported across uneven ground, and erected in perfect circles. Then decorated with images so detailed that you can still see the texture of feathers and fur carved into the limestone. Schmidt began dating the site using radiocarbon analysis of organic material found in the fill layers. The results came back, 9,600 years before the Common Era, older than the pyramids of Egypt by 6,000 years, older than Stonehenge by 6,500 years, older than the first cities of Sumer by 5,000 years, older than agriculture itself. According to every model of human development, this should not exist. Agriculture comes first, then settled villages, then specialization of labor, then monumental architecture. That is the sequence. That is how civilizations are built. You cannot have temples before you have farming because temples require a surplus of food to feed the workers who build them. But Göbekli Tepe reverses the order. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers. They had no pottery, no domesticated animals, no evidence of permanent settlement. They lived in a world where survival meant following herds and gathering wild plants. And yet they organized labor on a scale that required hundreds of people working together for years, perhaps decades. They did not build homes, they built temples. As if the sacred came before the practical, as if religion or ceremony or some form of collective ritual was the force that first brought humans together in large numbers. Klaus Schmidt spent the next 20 years excavating the site. He uncovered 20 circular structures, each one containing pillars arranged like the numbers on a clock face. Only 4 have been fully excavated. Ground-penetrating radar suggests there are at least 16 more buried beneath the surface. The site covers approximately 90,000 square meters. If the estimates are correct, it may contain thousands of pillars. And then, around 8,000 years before the Common Era, the entire complex was deliberately buried. Not destroyed, not abandoned, buried. Someone filled in the circles with dirt and rubble, covering the pillars completely as if they wanted to hide them, as if they were preserving them for a future generation, or protecting them from something. Why bury the most important ceremonial site in the region? Why go to the effort of covering thousands of tons of carved stone? Schmidt believed it was intentional preservation, a way to protect the site from damage or desecration. Others have suggested it was ritual closure. That the site had served its purpose and needed to be sealed. But there is another possibility, that whoever buried Göbekli Tepe knew something was coming, something that would destroy what they had built, and the only way to save it was to hide it beneath the earth. The question that haunts every archaeologist who visits Göbekli Tepe is simple. Where did they learn to do this? Where are the practice structures? Where are the smaller, simpler versions that people build before they attempt something monumental? They do not exist. Göbekli Tepe appears fully realized, as if the people who built it already knew how to quarry stone, transport massive weights, carve intricate images, and organize labor on a scale that should have required centuries of development. Schmidt himself said it best. Göbekli Tepe is not the beginning of architecture, it is the end of a tradition we do not yet understand. Thousands of miles to the southwest, on a limestone plateau at the edge of the Sahara Desert, 3 massive pyramids rise from the sand. They are so familiar that we forget how strange they are. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built according to conventional chronology, around 2,560 years before the Common Era during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. It contains approximately 2,300,000 stone blocks. Each block weighs between 2 and 15 tons. Some of the granite blocks in the internal chambers weigh as much as 80 tons. The pyramid originally stood 146 meters tall. For over 3,000 years, it was the tallest structure on Earth. The precision is what unsettles engineers. The base of the pyramid covers 13 acres and is level to within 2 centimeters. The 4 sides are aligned to the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, with an error of less than 1/15 of a degree. That is more accurate than the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, which was built with modern instruments in the 17th century. The dimensions encode mathematical constants that were supposedly unknown to the ancient Egyptians. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height is 2 pi. The height multiplied by 10 raised to the 9th power approximates the distance from the Earth to the Sun. The base length divided by twice the height yields pi accurate to several decimal places. Egyptologists argue that these are coincidences, that the Egyptians did not know pi or the golden ratio, and that the relationships are accidental byproducts of the pyramid's shape. But the mathematics is too consistent, too precise, too embedded in every measurement to dismiss as luck. Then there is the Sphinx, the massive limestone statue with the body of a lion and the head of a human. It sits in a rectangular enclosure carved directly out of the bedrock. According to standard Egyptology, it was built around the same time as the pyramids by Pharaoh Khafre. The evidence for this is a single inscription on a stela placed between the paws of the Sphinx over 1,000 years after Khafre's death. In 1990, a geologist named Robert Schoch was invited to examine the Sphinx by researcher John Anthony West. Schoch is not an Egyptologist. He is a geologist from Boston University. His area of expertise is rock weathering and erosion patterns. He looked at the limestone walls of the Sphinx enclosure and immediately saw something that did not match the conventional timeline. The weathering patterns were not caused by wind and sand. They were caused by water, heavy, sustained rainfall that carved deep vertical fissures into the rock. The problem is that the Giza Plateau has not experienced that kind of rainfall for at least 7,000 years. The region has been arid since the end of the African humid period, which ended around 5,000 to 7,000 years before the Common Era. If the Sphinx shows water erosion, it must have been carved when the climate was wetter. That would place its construction sometime before 5,000 years before the Common Era, possibly much earlier, perhaps as far back as 10,000 or 12,000 years ago. Egyptologists rejected the hypothesis immediately. The Sphinx, they insisted, was built during the 4th dynasty around 2,500 years before the Common Era. There is no evidence of advanced civilization in Egypt before that time. But Schoch was not arguing based on archaeology. He was arguing based on geology, and geology does not care about historical timelines. Rock erodes according to physical laws. Water erosion looks different from wind erosion. The evidence was clear. If Skok is correct, the Sphinx is at least twice as old as Egyptology claims. Which means it was built by people who existed before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, before hieroglyphics, before Egypt as we know it even existed. And if a civilization advanced enough to carve the Sphinx existed 12,000 years ago, where did they go? What happened to them? The same question arises across the world. In Peru, at a site called Sacsayhuaman overlooking the city of Cusco, massive stone blocks weighing over 100 tons are fitted together with such precision that you cannot slide a knife blade between them. No mortar, no gaps, just stone pressed against stone so tightly that the joints are nearly invisible. The blocks are not rectangular, they are polygonal, irregular shapes with multiple faces that interlock like a three-dimensional puzzle. Cutting and fitting stones like this requires an understanding of geometry, engineering, and material science that should not exist in a civilization without metal tools or written mathematics. The Inca who occupied the site in the 15th century did not claim to have built it. They said it was already ancient when they arrived. They called the builders the Viracocha, a race of gods or giants who came before the Inca and taught humanity the arts of civilization. In Lebanon, at a site called Baalbek, the ruins of a Roman temple complex sit atop a platform made of stones so large they defy explanation. 3 of the stones, called the trilithon, each weigh approximately 800 tons. Another stone, still in the quarry nearby, weighs an estimated 1,600 tons. How do you move a stone that weighs 1,600 tons? Modern cranes can lift that much, but they require steel cables, hydraulic systems, and carefully engineered supports. The Romans had none of that, neither did any civilization we know of in the ancient world. Some researchers suggest the platform predates the Romans by thousands of years, that the Romans simply built on top of an older foundation left by people whose names and history have been lost. In Japan, off the southern coast of the island of Yonaguni, divers discovered an underwater structure in 1987. It is a massive rock formation with flat surfaces, right angles, and what appear to be carved steps and terraces. The structure sits at a depth of 25 meters, which means it was above water during the last ice age when sea levels were lower. Geologist Robert Skok visited the site and examined the rock. He concluded that the formation is primarily natural but shows signs of human modification. Straight edges, smooth surfaces, alignments that are too regular to be erosion alone. If humans worked on the Yonaguni structure, they did so at least 10,000 years ago when the area was dry land. Which means there were people in Japan with the ability to quarry and shape stone long before any known Japanese civilization. In Bosnia, near the town of Visoko, a hill called Visočica has a pyramidal shape that some researchers believe is not natural. Ground-penetrating radar has detected internal chambers and tunnels. Samples taken from the surface show a concrete-like material that does not occur naturally. Radiocarbon dating of organic material embedded in the concrete return dates as old as 25,000 years. Mainstream archaeology dismisses the Bosnian pyramids as natural formations misinterpreted by enthusiasts, but the symmetry of the hill is striking. The sides align to the cardinal directions. The slope angle is consistent, and the tunnels beneath it are too regular to be random erosion. What connects all these sites is not geography or culture. It is impossibility. They are structures that should not exist according to the timeline we were taught. They appear in places where civilization supposedly did not exist. They demonstrate knowledge and engineering capability that should not have been possible. And yet they are real. You can visit them, touch them, measure them. They are not myths or legends or misunderstood metaphors. They are physical evidence carved into stone and left behind by people who knew things we are only beginning to rediscover. The standard explanation is that ancient people were more capable than we give them credit for. That they used ropes, wooden rollers, levers, and sheer determination to move massive stones and carve intricate patterns. That given enough time and enough workers, anything is possible. That explanation works for some structures, but it does not work for all of them. It does not explain the precision of the Great Pyramid. It does not explain the water erosion on the Sphinx. It does not explain how blocks weighing 800 tons were moved at Baalbek. It does not explain why Göbekli Tepe exists before farming. There is another explanation, one that archaeology resists but geology keeps suggesting, that these structures are older than we think, that they were built by civilizations that existed before the ones we know about. Civilizations that thrived during the last ice age and were destroyed when the climate changed and the seas rose. If that is true, then most of their cities are underwater. Most of their monuments are buried. Most of their knowledge is lost. What remains are fragments, outliers, structures built on high ground or inland, far from the coasts where people naturally settle. And what remains is strange, too precise, too advanced, too inexplicable. In the desert wind that blows across Göbekli Tepe at dusk, when the sun drops below the horizon and the temperature falls and the carved pillars cast long shadows across the sand, you can feel it. The weight of time, the presence of something we do not fully understand. These stones were not built to celebrate the beginning. They were built to remember the ending, to preserve something that had been lost. To pass on knowledge from a world that no longer existed. And if you stand there long enough, if you run your hand across the carvings of animals and symbols worn smooth by 11,000 years of wind and rain, you begin to understand. The people who built this were not primitive, they were survivors. Survivors of something so catastrophic that it erased almost everything that came before. And they built these monuments not for themselves but for us, as proof, as warning, as testimony that the world has ended before and that it will end again. Knowledge does not simply appear, it accumulates, generation by generation, trial and error, mistakes corrected, methods refined. A child learns to count, an adult learns to measure, a community learns to predict the seasons. A civilization learns to map the stars. That is how it is supposed to work. But when archaeologists began translating the oldest written records on Earth, when they deciphered the cuneiform tablets pressed into wet clay by Sumerian scribes 5,000 years ago, they found something unexpected. The knowledge was already complete, sophisticated, fully formed mathematics based on the number 60, a system so elegant that we still use it today to measure time and angles. 60 seconds in a minute. 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. The Sumerians did not invent the system gradually. It appears in their earliest texts already functioning, already embedded in every transaction, every measurement, every calculation. They had multiplication tables, division charts, methods for calculating square roots and compound interest. They understood geometry well enough to survey land, design irrigation systems, and construct temples aligned to celestial events. This was not basic counting. This was advanced mathematics. And they did not claim to have invented it. In their own words, preserved on clay tablets that have survived for millennia, they said the knowledge was given to them, taught to them by the Anunnaki, beings who came from the heavens and brought the arts of civilization. We read that as myth, as primitive people attributing their own achievements to gods because they could not imagine human effort being sufficient. But what if they meant it literally? What if they were preserving the memory of teachers whose names they knew, whose lessons they remembered, who came from a world that no longer existed? The Sumerians were obsessed with the sky. Every major city had a ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid that served as both temple and observatory. Priests climbed to the top each night to watch the movements of planets and stars. They recorded what they saw with meticulous care, night after night, year after year, generation after generation. The tablets that survive show observations of Venus spanning decades, not scattered notes, continuous tracking. They knew Venus disappeared and reappeared in cycles. They knew how long each cycle lasted. They could predict when Venus would rise in the east and when it would set in the west. Accuracy within a single day across years of observation. This kind of precision requires institutional memory. It requires schools where knowledge is taught, libraries where records are stored, a culture that values continuity over centuries, and the Sumerians had all of that. By 3,000 years before the Common Era, they had scribal schools called Edubas where students learned to read and write cuneiform, memorized mathematical tables, and studied the movements of celestial bodies. But here is the problem. The Edubas were teaching knowledge that already existed. The curriculum did not evolve. It was passed down. The same texts copied generation after generation. The same tables memorized. The same astronomical observations referenced. As if the knowledge had been compiled long before and the Edubas existed only to preserve it. One tablet, found in the ruins of Nineveh and now housed in the British Museum, contains a star catalogue. It lists constellations, their positions, and their movements across the sky. The catalogue includes references to the precession of the equinoxes, a phenomenon that takes 25,920 years to complete one full cycle. Precession occurs because the Earth wobbles slightly on its axis like a spinning top. Over thousands of years, this wobble changes which star appears at the North Celestial Pole. Right now, Polaris is our North Star. But 5,000 years ago, the North Star was Thuban in the constellation Draco. And in 12,000 years, it will be Vega. To detect precession, you need continuous observation across centuries. You need records accurate enough to compare the position of stars today with their position decades or centuries ago. The Greeks discovered precession in the 2nd century before the Common Era, and they are credited with being the first. But the Sumerian tablets suggest they knew about it 2,000 years earlier. How? Where did they get the data? Who observed the stars long enough to detect a shift that takes lifetimes to measure? The Maya had similar knowledge. In the jungles of Central America, without metal tools or the wheel, they built cities with pyramids aligned to the solstices and equinoxes. They tracked Venus with the same obsessive precision as the Sumerians. Their calendar, the long count, measured time in cycles spanning thousands of years. The Maya believed time moved in great wheels. Each cycle ended in destruction and renewal. The current cycle, according to their system, began on a date we translate as August 11, 3,114 years before the Common Era. The cycle was set to end on December 21, 2012 in the Common Era. The end date caused panic. People believed the Maya had predicted the apocalypse, but the Maya themselves did not describe the end as destruction. They described it as transformation, the completion of one age and the beginning of another. A return to balance. What is striking is not the prediction but the mathematics. To calculate cycles spanning over 5,000 years requires understanding large numbers, positional notation, and the concept of zero. The Maya had all three. They used a base 20 number system with a symbol for zero that functioned exactly like ours. This appeared in their inscriptions by the 1st century of the Common Era, over 1,000 years before Europe adopted the concept of zero from India. They also encoded the precession of the equinoxes into their mythology. In the Popol Vuh, the Mayan creation epic, the gods destroy and remake the world multiple times. Each creation lasts for one great cycle. Scholars like Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Dechend in their book Hamlet's Mill argued that these myths are not religious allegory but astronomical data. That the destruction of worlds represents the shifting of the celestial poles as precession moves the stars. If they are correct, then the Maya, like the Sumerians, were preserving knowledge that required centuries of observation to obtain. Knowledge that should not exist in a civilization that supposedly began from nothing. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis compiled a world map using older sources. Some of those sources, he wrote, dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. Others were even older. The map shows the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and South America with remarkable accuracy. But there is something strange. The southern portion of the map shows a coastline that matches the coast of Antarctica. Not modern Antarctica, which is buried under ice, but Antarctica as it would appear if the ice were removed. The mountains, the bays, the rivers. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, and it has been covered by ice for at least 6,000 years, possibly much longer. How could a map from 1513 show the coastline beneath the ice? Piri Reis himself provides the answer in the notes written on the map. He says he copied it from older maps that came from the Library of Alexandria, maps that were already ancient when the library was built. In 1960, Professor Charles Hapgood analyzed the Piri Reis map and concluded that it was based on source maps created using spherical trigonometry, a mathematical technique not developed in Europe until the 18th century. The map also shows longitude accurately, something European cartographers could not do until the invention of the marine chronometer in 1761. Hapgood proposed that the source maps were created by an advanced maritime civilization that existed before the end of the last ice age, a civilization with knowledge of mathematics, navigation, and cartography that was lost when the ice melted and sea levels rose. Mainstream historians dismissed the theory. They argued that the map was inaccurate or misinterpreted. But the mathematics does not lie. The map uses projection techniques that should not exist in 1513, and the coastline of Antarctica matches geological surveys conducted in the 20th century using sonar and ice-penetrating radar. If the Piri Reis map is based on older sources, and if those sources accurately depict Antarctica without ice, then someone mapped the continent when it was ice-free. That would place the original surveys at least 6,000 years ago, possibly as far back as 12,000 years. In 1901, sponge divers working off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera discovered a shipwreck. Among the pottery and statues, they found a corroded lump of bronze. When archaeologists cleaned it, they realized it was not a lump, it was a machine. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be known, is an ancient analog computer. It contains over 30 bronze gears arranged in a complex system that models the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. Turn the crank, and the gears move dials that show the position of celestial bodies on any given date. The device could predict eclipses. It tracked the metonic cycle, the 19-year period after which the phases of the moon repeat on the same calendar dates. It even accounted for the irregular orbit of the moon using a gear system that matches techniques developed in the 14th century. The shipwreck dates to around 70 to 60 years before the Common Era. But the mechanism itself may be older. Inscriptions on the device reference celestial observations made in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Nothing like it appears again in history for over 1,000 years. The device demonstrates a level of mechanical and astronomical sophistication that should not exist in the ancient world. When it was discovered, archaeologists did not know what to make of it. Some thought it was a modern object that had contaminated the wreck. Others believed it was a one-of-a-kind curiosity. But X-ray imaging and CT scans revealed the full complexity of the gear system. It was not a curiosity. It was advanced technology. Technology that required knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and precision engineering. Who built it? Where did they learn? And if the Greeks could build something this sophisticated 2,000 years ago, what else have we lost? In Iraq, archaeologists excavating the ruins of Qujet Rabu near Baghdad found clay jars dating to around 250 years before the Common Era. The jars were filled with asphalt. Inside the asphalt were copper cylinders. Inside the cylinders were iron rods. When researchers filled the jars with an acidic liquid like vinegar or wine, the jars produced an electrical current. They were batteries. The purpose is unknown. Some researchers suggest they were used for electroplating gold onto silver. Others believe they were used in religious rituals to create shocks or sparks that seemed magical. Still others argue they are evidence of lost electrical knowledge. Mainstream archaeology remains skeptical. Batteries require an understanding of chemistry and electricity that should not exist in ancient Mesopotamia. But the jars exist. They produce voltage when tested, and they are not unique. Similar jars have been found at other sites in the region. If the ancients understood electricity even in a primitive form, what else did they know that we have forgotten? The deeper we dig into the past, the more we find that does not fit, knowledge that appears too early, technologies that seem out of place. Systems of thought that require centuries to develop but appear fully formed in the earliest records. The standard explanation is that ancient people were smarter than we assume. That they observed carefully, experimented patiently, and passed down their discoveries through oral tradition until writing allowed them to record it. That explanation works for some things, but it does not explain why the same advanced knowledge appears in multiple cultures separated by oceans and millennia. It does not explain how the Sumerians and the Maya both tracked Venus with the same precision. It does not explain how maps of Antarctica existed before Antarctica was discovered. It does not explain how the Greeks built computers 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. There is another explanation, that the knowledge is older than the civilizations that recorded it, that it was inherited, passed down from an earlier age. Preserved in fragments by survivors who did not fully understand what they were copying, but knew it was important. In India, the ancient Sanskrit texts called the Vedas contain descriptions that sound disturbingly modern. The Mahabharata, an epic poem composed over 2,000 years ago but based on older oral traditions, describes weapons that sound like nuclear explosions. One verse reads, "A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe." An incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns rose in all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death which reduced to ashes the entire race. Another passage describes the aftermath. Corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without cause. Birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, soldiers threw themselves in streams to wash themselves and their equipment. For centuries, scholars read this as poetic exaggeration. Mythical battles fought with divine weapons. But after the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, some researchers began to reconsider. The descriptions matched the effects of nuclear weapons: the heat, the flash, the radiation sickness. At the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, archaeologists found skeletons scattered in the streets as if people had died suddenly. Some of the skeletons show elevated levels of radiation. The city itself shows signs of intense heat. Stones that have been vitrified turn to glass by temperatures exceeding 1,400 degrees Celsius. Vitrification occurs naturally in volcanic eruptions or lightning strikes, but Mohenjo-Daro is not near any volcanoes, and the heat was too uniform, too widespread to be explained by lightning. Some researchers argue that the city was destroyed by a nuclear explosion thousands of years ago. Others dismiss this as fantasy. They say the radiation is contamination from modern sources. The vitrification is misidentified. The texts are myths, but the texts are consistent. Across India, ancient writings describe flying machines called vimanas, weapons that could destroy cities, and wars fought by beings with god-like power. The Vaimanika Shastra, a text compiled in the early 20th century but claiming to be based on ancient sources, includes technical diagrams of flying machines with descriptions of propulsion systems, navigation methods, and weapon systems. Are these memories of advanced technology? Or are they imagination? We do not know, but the consistency is striking. What we do know is this: the oldest civilizations on Earth possessed knowledge that required centuries to develop. They had mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and possibly technologies we can barely recognize. And they did not claim to have invented this knowledge. They claimed it was given to them, taught to them, passed down from a time before. If they were right, if the knowledge is inherited, then somewhere in the distant past there existed a civilization advanced enough to understand the stars, map the world, and encode information in ways that would survive catastrophe. That civilization is gone now, Erased by time or disaster or both, what remains are echoes, fragments copied into clay and stone and myth, instructions half remembered, technologies half understood, maps of a world that no longer exists. And perhaps that is the real legacy, not the knowledge itself, but the fact that it survived at all. That someone somewhere cared enough to preserve it, to pass it on, to leave behind clues for future generations who might one day ask the same questions. Where did we come from? How much have we forgotten? And what else is waiting to be remembered? The wind moves across the ruins of Babylon, across the temples of the Maya, across the submerged cities beneath the sea. And in the silence, in the spaces between what we know and what we have lost, the knowledge waits, patient, encoded, ready to be found by those who are willing to look. Time, we are told, moves in one direction, forward, from past to present to future, from primitive to advanced, from ignorance to knowledge. History is a line. Progress is inevitable. We are the culmination of everything that came before. But that is not how ancient people saw it. They saw time as a wheel, turning, repeating, rising and falling in great cycles that stretched across ages. Birth, growth, decay, death, and then rebirth over and over. Not in identical repetition, but in patterns that echoed across millennia. The Greeks called it the Great Year. The Hindus called it the Yugas. The Maya called it the Long Count. The Hopi spoke of worlds that came before this one. The Egyptians remembered a first time when the gods walked the earth. And in every tradition, the pattern is the same. Ages of harmony followed by ages of chaos. Knowledge given, then lost, then recovered. Worlds destroyed, then remade. These are not isolated myths. They appear on every inhabited continent, in cultures that had no contact with one another, separated by oceans and millennia, yet telling the same story in different languages. What if they are not myths at all? What if they are memory, collective memory of cycles that actually occurred? Catastrophes that reset civilization, ages that ended and began again. And what if those cycles are written not just in myth, but in the movement of the stars themselves? The Earth spins on its axis once every 24 hours. That gives us day and night. The Earth orbits the Sun once every 365 days. That gives us the seasons. But there is a third motion, slower, almost imperceptible. A wobble in the Earth's axis like a spinning top that is losing momentum. This wobble is called axial precession. It takes 25,920 years to complete one full cycle. During that time, the North Celestial Pole, the point in the sky directly above the North Pole, traces a slow circle through the stars. Right now, Polaris marks the north. But 5,000 years ago, the North Star was Thuban, and in 13,000 years it will be Vega. Precession also shifts the position of the zodiac constellations against the backdrop of the Sun's annual path. Every 2,160 years, the Sun at the spring equinox rises in a different constellation. We are currently in the age of Pisces, transitioning into the age of Aquarius. Before Pisces was Aries, before Aries was Taurus. And so on, backwards through the zodiac, completing the full cycle in just under 26,000 years. The Greeks discovered precession in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Hipparchus of Nicaea compared ancient Babylonian star catalogs with his own observations and noticed that the stars had shifted position over the centuries. He calculated the rate of precession with remarkable accuracy. But here is the mystery. The Greeks may have discovered it, but they were not the first to know it. In the 1960s, two scholars named Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Dechend published a book called Hamlet's Mill. In it, they argued that myths from cultures around the world encode knowledge of precession, not in numbers or diagrams but in stories. Symbolic language describing the slow turning of the celestial sphere. They examined myths from Sumer, Egypt, India, China, Mesoamerica, Polynesia, and Scandinavia. In each tradition, they found recurring symbols. A mill that grinds, a pillar that holds up the sky, a tree that connects heaven and earth, a flood that destroys the world, a fire that consumes everything, and always the idea of ages, one world ending, another beginning. Santillana and Dechend believed these symbols represented the precession of the equinoxes. The mill that grinds is the celestial sphere turning slowly through the zodiac. The pillar that holds up the sky is the axis of the earth. When the pillar breaks or the mill stops, the age ends. The flood or fire that follows is the catastrophe that accompanies the transition from one age to the next. If they are correct, then the myth makers were astronomers. Not primitive storytellers trying to explain thunder and rain, but sophisticated observers encoding long-term celestial cycles into narratives that could survive without written records. The Hindu texts describe time in vast cycles called yugas, 4 ages, each shorter and more corrupt than the last. The Satya Yuga, the age of truth, lasts 1,728,000 years. The Treta Yuga, the age of ritual, lasts 1,296,000 years. The Dvapara Yuga, the age of doubt, lasts 864,000 years. And the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, lasts 432,000 years. These numbers seem absurd, millions of years, impossible timescales for human history, but they are not random. They follow mathematical patterns. Each yuga is a fraction of the one before it, and the total cycle, called a Mahyuga, lasts 4,320,000 years. Multiply that by 1,000 and you get the length of a day in the life of Brahma, the creator. Multiply again and you reach scales that resemble the lifespan of the universe itself. Some scholars suggest these numbers are symbolic, representations of moral decline rather than actual time. But others point out that the ratios are too precise. The math is too deliberate. And the smallest unit, 432,000 years, is exactly 20 times the precession cycle of 25,920 years. Coincidence? Or evidence that the Hindu timekeepers understood precession and embedded it into their cosmology. The Maya had a similar system. Their long count calendar measured time from a starting point they called the beginning of the current age. In our calendar, that date translates to August 11th, 3,114 years before the Common Era. The cycle was set to end after 5,125 years on December 21st, 2012. But the Maya also spoke of longer cycles. The Baktan, a period of 144,000 days, roughly 394 years, 13 Baktans made one full cycle, but beyond that were even longer units. The Piktan, the Kalabtan, the Kinchiltan. Cycles spanning millions of years, just like the Yugas. Why would a culture that existed for only a few thousand years create a calendar capable of measuring millions? Unless they inherited it, unless the calendar was designed by people who thought in terms of deep time, people who understood that civilizations rise and fall across ages, and who wanted to leave a tool for measuring those ages. The Egyptians believed in a time called Zep Tepi, the first time. An age when the gods walked the earth and established the principles of order and justice. All of Egyptian religion was an attempt to maintain the balance set during Zep Tepi, to keep chaos from returning, to prevent the world from falling back into the formless void that existed before the gods brought light. In their mythology, the god Osiris ruled during Zep Tepi. He taught humanity agriculture, law, and the arts of civilization. But he was murdered by his brother Set, dismembered and scattered. His wife Isis gathered the pieces and resurrected him long enough to conceive a son, Horus, who would later defeat Set and restore order. This is usually read as allegory. Life, death, rebirth, the cycle of the seasons, the flooding of the Nile, but some researchers see astronomy. Osiris as the constellation Orion, Isis as Sirius, the death and resurrection as the stars disappearing below the horizon and rising again. The battle between Horus and Set as the shifting of the heavens during precession. The Giza pyramids themselves may encode this knowledge. The 3 pyramids align with the 3 stars of Orion's belt. The Nile mirrors the Milky Way. And the Sphinx, if geologist Robert Schoch is correct, was carved when the sun rose in the constellation Leo during the spring equinox. That would have occurred around 10,500 years before the Common Era. Exactly when the African humid period ended and the climate shifted from wet to dry. If the monuments at Giza were designed to mark a specific point in the precession cycle, they are not tombs or temples. They are clocks, star clocks, built to commemorate the moment when one age ended and another began. The Hopi people of the American Southwest preserve a tradition of 4 worlds. The first world was destroyed by fire. The second world was destroyed by ice. The third world was destroyed by flood. We live in the 4th world. And according to Hopi prophecy, this world will also end unless humanity learns to live in balance with nature. Each world lasted thousands of years. Each ended when people became corrupt and forgot the teachings of the Creator. A few righteous people were saved and allowed to continue. They carried the knowledge into the new world and started over. This is not unique to the Hopi. The Aztecs believed in 5 suns, 5 ages, each one ending in catastrophe. The first sun ended in jaguars devouring humanity. The second ended in hurricanes, the third in fire, the fourth in flood. We live in the 5th sun, the age of movement, which will end in earthquakes. The Inca spoke of Pachacuti, the turning of time, an event that occurs every few thousand years when the world is overturned and remade. Mountains rise where valleys were, oceans cover the land. The sky and earth change places, and humanity begins again with only fragments of what was lost. In Norse mythology, the world ends in Ragnarok, the final battle between gods and giants. Fire and ice consume everything. The world tree Yggdrasil trembles but does not fall. From its roots, a new world grows. 2 humans survive hidden in the trunk of the tree. They emerge into a new age and repopulate the earth. In every tradition, the pattern repeats. Destruction is not final, it is transitional. The end of one age is the beginning of another. Time does not move forward, it turns, and with each turn the world is remade. Modern science once dismissed these myths as primitive attempts to explain natural disasters, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods, but in the last few decades, geology and archaeology have begun to confirm that catastrophic events do reset civilizations. The Younger Dryas impact, the melting of the ice sheets, the sudden rise of sea levels, the extinction of megafauna, all of these occurred around the time the myths describe, and the timing is not random. 12,800 years ago, when the Younger Dryas began, the Earth was in a specific position in its precession cycle. The spring equinox sun was rising in the constellation Virgo, halfway through the cycle from where it is now. If catastrophes are triggered by celestial mechanics, by the alignment of the Earth and Sun during precession, then the myths are not just memory. They are warning. They are telling us that these events repeat, that the wheel turns, that the age we live in will also end. Researcher Graham Hancock has spent decades investigating the possibility of a lost civilization destroyed at the end of the last ice age. He argues that survivors of this civilization carried their knowledge to places like Egypt, Sumer, and Mesoamerica, where they taught the locals and became the gods of later mythology. The advanced knowledge that appears suddenly in these cultures, the astronomy, the mathematics, the engineering, was not invented. It was inherited. Geologist Randall Carlson studies catastrophism. The idea that Earth's history is shaped not by slow, gradual change, but by sudden, violent events. He points to evidence of megafloods carved into the landscape of North America. Channels hundreds of feet deep gouged out by water moving faster than any river today. Evidence of ice dams breaking and releasing lakes the size of small seas in a matter of hours. These megafloods occurred at the end of the last ice age, exactly when the myths say the world was destroyed by water. Astrophysicist Paul Laviolette has proposed that the Sun undergoes periodic outbursts, solar micronova events that release massive amounts of energy and charged particles. These events could trigger climate change, melt ice sheets, and cause widespread devastation. If such events occur on a regular cycle tied to galactic or solar dynamics, they would appear to ancient observers as the wrath of the heavens. The end of an age written in fire. The evidence is fragmentary, controversial, resisted by mainstream science, but it is growing. Ice core samples show sudden climate shifts. Geological surveys reveal flood channels and impact craters. Myths from every culture describe the same cataclysms. And if the myths are true, if the cycles are real, then the question is not whether another catastrophe will occur. The question is when. The precession cycle is 25,920 years. We are currently near the end of one half cycle, halfway around the wheel. The spring equinox sun is moving from Pisces into Aquarius. The same transition point that ancient astronomers marked as significant. Are we approaching another turning, another reset, another moment when the world as we know it ends and a new age begins? Some researchers believe we are overdue. The Earth's magnetic field is weakening, a sign that a pole reversal may be approaching. The sun is entering a period of increased activity. Asteroid detection systems are finding more near-Earth objects than ever before. And the climate is changing faster than models predicted. Any one of these could be the trigger, or perhaps it will be something we have not anticipated. A comet fragment, a volcanic supereruption, a solar flare that knocks out the electrical grid and collapses modern infrastructure within days. If catastrophe comes, what will survive? Our knowledge is stored in data centers that require constant power. Our food comes from supply chains that require constant fuel. Our communication depends on satellites and fiber optic cables. If the power goes out for more than a few weeks, the system collapses, and within a generation, most of what we know is lost. What will the survivors remember? Will they remember how airplanes worked, how computers were built, how the internet functioned, or will they remember only fragments? Stories of the old world. Myths about people who could fly through the sky and speak across distances and light the night with captured lightning. And when they rebuild, will they carve warnings into stone? Will they align their temples to the stars? Will they pass down knowledge in myths and symbols, hoping that someone in a future age will understand? Perhaps that is what the ancients were doing. Perhaps the myths are not about the past, they are about the future, instructions for the survivors, reminders that the wheel turns, that ages end and begin, that catastrophe is not the end but the transition. The wind moves across the pyramids at Giza, across the temples of Angkor Wat, across the stone circles of Britain and the pyramids of Mexico. And in the silence, in the alignment of stones with stars, there is a message. The world has ended before, it will end again, but humanity survives. We always survive, smaller, scattered, with only fragments of what was lost, but we survive, and we rebuild. And we remember just enough to leave warnings for those who come after. Time is not a line, it is a wheel, and the wheel is always turning. Knowledge is fragile. A single fire can destroy a library that took centuries to build. A flood can erase inscriptions carved into stone. A war can scatter scholars and burn their books. Within a single generation, if the old do not teach the young, entire systems of thought vanish as if they never existed. And yet some knowledge survives. Not in libraries or universities, not written in books that can be burned or tablets that can be shattered, but in stories, in songs, in rituals passed from parent to child, in monuments built to last millennia, in symbols that carry meaning even when their origin is forgotten. This is how memory persists. Not through institutions, but through people who remember. People who understand that what they carry is too important to let die. People who become the vessels of knowledge, the keepers of secrets, the bridges between what was and what will be. In Northern Australia, Aboriginal communities tell stories about the land. Stories that describe the coastline as it was thousands of years ago. Stories that mention islands that no longer exist, beaches that are now underwater, landmarks swallowed by the sea. For generations, anthropologists dismissed these stories as myth, dreamtime tales, symbolic explanations of creation with no basis in reality. But in recent years, geologists began comparing the stories to data about sea level rise at the end of the last ice age. The match was exact. One story from the Yolngu people describes a time when you could walk to islands that are now separated by deep water. Geologists confirmed that between 7,000 and 10,000 years ago, those islands were connected to the mainland. The sea level was lower. The land bridge existed. Another story from the Gundit Chimara people describes volcanic eruptions and lava flows that created the landscape of Western Victoria. For years, scientists believed these volcanoes had been dormant for tens of thousands of years, long before humans arrived in Australia. But when geologists dated the lava flows, they found evidence of eruptions as recent as 7,000 years ago. The stories were not myth. They were eyewitness accounts passed down through 280 generations. 280 generations. That is how long oral tradition can preserve accurate information when a culture makes memory its priority. When elders teach the young not just what to believe but what to remember. When stories are not entertainment but history. When the survival of the group depends on knowing where water is, where food grows, and what dangers lie hidden in the land. The Polynesians crossed the Pacific Ocean in canoes without compasses, without maps, without instruments of any kind. They navigated by the stars, by the shape of waves, by the flight patterns of birds, by the color of the water and the smell of the wind. They could tell you which island lay beyond the horizon even when no land was visible. They could predict storms days before they arrived. They could find a tiny speck of coral in the vastness of the ocean using only memory and observation. This knowledge was not written down. It was taught, passed from master navigators to apprentices through years of training. The apprentices learned to read the swells, to recognize the subtle changes in wave patterns that indicated an island ahead, to memorize the rising and setting points of stars across the seasons, to understand the layered knowledge accumulated over thousands of years of voyaging. When Europeans arrived in the Pacific with their sextants and chronometers, they marveled at Polynesian navigation. How could people without instruments cross thousands of miles of open ocean and arrive exactly where they intended? Some Europeans refused to believe it was possible. They insisted the Polynesians had drifted on currents, that their presence on distant islands was accident, not skill. But the Polynesians knew better. They had been sailing these waters for over 3,000 years. They had settled every habitable island in the Pacific from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island. They had traveled farther and more accurately than any European fleet, and they had done it with nothing but knowledge. Knowledge preserved not in books but in the minds of people who understood that forgetting meant death. When the last great navigator dies without passing on the teachings, the knowledge dies with them, and entire systems of understanding the world disappear in a single generation. That almost happened. Colonial governments discouraged traditional navigation. Missionaries condemned it as pagan. Young people were sent to schools where European knowledge was valued and indigenous knowledge was dismissed as superstition. By the 1970s, traditional navigation was nearly extinct. Only a handful of elders still knew the old ways. Then something remarkable occurred. A movement began to revive the knowledge. Master navigators like Maupi Ilug from the Caroline Islands agreed to teach a new generation. In 1976, a replica Polynesian voyaging canoe called Hokulea sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional navigation. No instruments, no GPS, just stars, waves, and memory. The voyage proved that Polynesian seafaring was not accident, it was science. Sophisticated, systematic, and precise. Today, Hokulea has sailed over 200,000 miles. It has visited ports across the Pacific and around the world, and everywhere it goes it carries a message. That knowledge does not require writing to survive. That oral tradition, when honored and maintained, is as reliable as any book. That memory can outlast stone. But what happens when catastrophe strikes? When entire populations are displaced? When languages die and cultures collapse? How does knowledge survive then? Sometimes it goes underground. The Library of Alexandria was the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. Founded in the 3rd century before the Common Era in Egypt, it housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Works on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, history, and literature. Scholars from across the Mediterranean traveled to Alexandria to study and teach. It was the intellectual center of the Hellenistic world. And then it burned, not all at once, not in a single catastrophic fire, but gradually, over centuries, damaged during Julius Caesar's siege in 48 before the Common Era, damaged again during the reign of Aurelian in 270 of the Common Era, gradually stripped and neglected as the Roman Empire declined. By the time the Arabs conquered Egypt in the 7th century, the library was already gone. What was lost, we will never know completely. Ancient historians mention works that no longer exist, histories of Carthage and Phoenicia, scientific treatises by scholars whose names we know but whose writings have vanished. Star catalogs compiled over centuries, medical texts describing surgeries we can no longer perform, philosophical arguments that might have changed the course of Western thought. Some of that knowledge survived because scholars made copies. They took scrolls from Alexandria back to Rome, Athens, or Baghdad. They translated Greek into Latin or Arabic. They preserved fragments in commentaries and summaries. The knowledge scattered, diluted, but not entirely lost. Other knowledge may have survived in secret, passed down through mystery schools and secret societies that guarded ancient teachings from destruction or corruption. The Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, the Pythagorean schools in Italy, the Hermetic traditions in Egypt, the Druids in Britain, the Gnostic sects of early Christianity. These groups claimed to possess knowledge that the masses were not ready to receive. Esoteric teachings about the nature of the soul, the structure of the cosmos, the mathematical principles underlying reality. They taught in symbols and allegories. They required initiates to swear oaths of secrecy, and they preserved their traditions across generations through ritual and instruction. When Christianity became the state religion of Rome in the 4th century, many of these mystery schools were suppressed. Their temples were destroyed, their priests were persecuted, their teachings were declared heretical, but the knowledge did not disappear completely. It went underground, hidden in coded texts, preserved in symbolic art. Embedded in the architecture of cathedrals and the layout of sacred sites, some researchers believe that medieval guilds of stonemasons, the builders of Europe's great cathedrals, carried ancient knowledge encoded in their craft. The proportions of Gothic architecture follow mathematical principles that the builders may not have fully understood but faithfully reproduced. The golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, sacred geometry based on the measurements of Solomon's temple. Where did they learn it? From older texts, from traditions passed down through Roman engineers, or from secret schools that preserved pre-Christian knowledge and disguised it in Christian symbolism. The Knights Templar, a military and religious order founded during the Crusades, were rumored to have discovered ancient manuscripts beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, texts from the time of Solomon or earlier, knowledge that gave them power and wealth until they were betrayed and destroyed by the King of France in 1307. Before their downfall, they built a network of fortresses across Europe and the Middle East, each one aligned to astronomical events. Each one containing symbols that scholars still struggle to interpret. Were they preserving something, protecting knowledge from destruction? Or were the legends invented by later writers looking for mystery where none existed? We do not know, but the pattern repeats across cultures and centuries. Knowledge under threat goes into hiding. It is encoded, disguised, buried, waiting for a time when it can be safely revealed. In Tibet, monasteries preserve texts written in languages no one can read, scrolls sealed in libraries where only the highest monks are allowed to enter. Stories say these texts contain knowledge from before the flood, instructions left by teachers who knew the world was ending, techniques for meditation, methods for extending life, maps of inner landscapes that mirror the stars. Outsiders are not welcome. The knowledge is not for sale, it is not for publication, it belongs to the lineage, to those who have earned the right to receive it through years of training and discipline, and it will remain hidden until the time is right. In the Vatican, beneath St. Peter's Basilica, there is an archive, 53 miles of shelving, Documents dating back over 1,000 years, papal correspondence, records of inquisitions, trials of heretics, reports from missionaries in distant lands. Some sections are open to scholars, but others remain classified, closed to outsiders, restricted even to priests. What is hidden there? Letters describing contact with non-Christian civilizations, records of suppressed gospels or banned texts. Knowledge that conflicts with official doctrine, or simply routine bureaucracy inflated by conspiracy theorists into something more. The Vatican releases documents slowly. A few files declassified every decade, enough to satisfy curiosity but never enough to reveal the full picture. Whether they are protecting secrets or simply preserving privacy, the result is the same. The unknown grows larger in imagination than it ever was in reality. But there are places where knowledge is not hidden at all, where it stands in plain sight, carved into monuments that no one can destroy, encoded in structures that anyone can visit, waiting for someone to notice, someone to ask the right questions. Stonehenge in England, a circle of massive stones erected over 4,000 years ago. Archaeologists know when it was built. They know the stones came from Wales over 200 miles away. They know it aligns to the summer solstice. But they do not know why. Why transport stones weighing 25 tons across land and water when local stone was available? Why arrange them in precise astronomical alignments? Why rebuild the site multiple times over 1,000 years, each version more complex than the last? One possibility is that Stonehenge was a calendar, a tool for tracking the sun and moon, predicting eclipses, marking the seasons for agricultural purposes. But other researchers suggest it was more than that it encoded knowledge in its geometry. That the spacing of the stones, the angles of alignment, the proportions of the circle represent mathematical principles meant to be passed down through generations. If catastrophe destroyed the civilization that built Stonehenge, if writing was lost and oral traditions faded, the stones would remain. Future generations could study them, measure them, decode the knowledge embedded in their arrangement. The monument itself becomes a library, a book written in stone. The same principle applies to the pyramids, to Angkor Wat, to Machu Picchu, to the Nazca Lines. These structures are not just buildings or art. They are information, knowledge frozen in architecture, designed to outlast paper and parchment and digital storage, designed to survive the collapse of the civilizations that built them, because the builders knew something we are only beginning to remember. That civilizations fall, that knowledge is lost, that the world ends and begins again, and the only way to preserve what matters is to carve it into the earth itself. In the Andes Mountains of Peru, at an altitude of over 3,000 meters, the ruins of Tiwanaku spread across the high plateau. The site is over 2,000 years old, possibly older. Its most famous feature is the Gateway of the Sun, a massive stone archway carved from a single block of andesite. The archway is covered in intricate designs, a central figure surrounded by geometric patterns and rows of smaller figures. For over a century, researchers have tried to decode the gateway. Some believe it is a calendar, a representation of the solar year with markers for solstices and equinoxes. Others argue it is a star map, a depiction of constellations and planetary movements. Still others suggest it is cosmological, a symbolic representation of the universe as the Tiwanaku people understood it. What is clear is that the gateway was not decorative. The carvings follow mathematical patterns, the proportions are precise, the alignment of the structure matches celestial events. It was built to convey information important enough to carve into stone that weighs over 10 tons. Who was it meant for? The people who built it already knew what it represented. Was it for their descendants? For future generations who might forget, or for strangers who would come later after the civilization was gone and need to understand what had been lost? The same question applies to the Nazca Lines. Enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert floor of southern Peru, lines stretching for kilometers. Geometric shapes, images of animals, a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey. each one so large that you can only see the full design from the air? Why create images that can only be appreciated from above? The Nazca people did not have airplanes. They did not have hot air balloons. They would never have seen their own creations from the perspective that reveals their purpose, unless the images were not for them, unless they were messages, signs meant to be seen by someone or something that could fly. Or by future people who would develop the technology to view them from above. A way of saying we were here. We understood geometry and astronomy. We encoded knowledge into the land. Do not forget us. Whether or not that interpretation is correct, the intent is undeniable. The lines were not accidents. They were not random. They required planning, surveying, and coordination. They were built with purpose, and that purpose was to communicate across time. That is how knowledge survives catastrophe, not through luck, not through chance, but through deliberate effort, through people who understand that what they know might be lost, through communities that make memory their highest priority, through builders who carve their wisdom into stone, through teachers who pass down traditions even when the world does not understand their value, and through symbols. Simple, universal, capable of carrying meaning across languages and cultures and millennia. The spiral, the circle, the cross, the triangle, the tree, the serpent, these symbols appear in every ancient culture. On cave walls in France, on pottery in China, on temples in India, on stones in Ireland, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, yet always recognizable, always carrying weight. Are they archetypes, patterns hardwired into the human mind, or are they inherited, passed down from a common source? A lost civilization that spread across the world and left its symbols behind as markers, as reminders, as keys to unlock knowledge that was deliberately hidden until the time was right. We do not know, but we know this. Knowledge can survive anything if people are determined to preserve it, if they encode it in stories that children memorize, if they carve it into monuments that cannot be moved, if they teach it in secret schools that operate for centuries, if they hide it in symbols that only the initiated can read. The question is not whether ancient knowledge survived. The question is whether we are ready to find it, whether we are willing to look beyond the surface, to ask uncomfortable questions, to challenge the timelines we were taught, to consider the possibility that the ancients were not primitive but sophisticated, not ignorant but intentional, not superstitious but scientific in ways we are only beginning to understand. Because if the world has ended before, if civilizations have risen and fallen in cycles, then somewhere in the ruins and the myths and the monuments, the survivors left instructions. Not for themselves, for us, for the people who would come after. For the generation that would live in the next age and need to know what came before. And if we listen carefully, if we study the stones and decode the symbols and remember the stories, we might hear them. Voices from the distant past, whispering across millennia, telling us what they learned, warning us what to avoid, showing us how to survive what is coming next. The wind moves through Stonehenge at dawn. The first light of summer touches the heel stone. The shadows align exactly as they were meant to 4,000 years ago. And in that moment, across all the centuries that separate us from the builders, the message is clear. We were here, we knew, and we wanted you to remember. If the world ended tomorrow, what would remain of us? Not our cities. Concrete crumbles, steel rusts. Glass shatters. Within 100 years, vegetation would reclaim the streets. Within 1,000 years, most buildings would collapse. Within 10,000 years, nearly every trace of modern civilization would be buried beneath soil and sediment. Future archaeologists digging through the ruins would find fragments, plastic bottles that refuse to decompose, layers of asphalt from roads, scattered foundations of skyscrapers, but they would struggle to understand what we were, how we lived, what we knew. Our knowledge would vanish even faster. Everything we have learned, everything we have discovered, everything that makes us modern exists in forms more fragile than we like to admit. Books rot, hard drives fail, servers require constant power and maintenance. If the electrical grid collapsed and stayed down for more than a few months, most of our digital information would become irretrievable within years. The internet is not stored in some permanent archive floating in the clouds. It lives on physical servers in data centers that require electricity, cooling systems, and regular maintenance. Without power, the servers overheat and fail. Without technicians to replace failing components, the data corrupts. Within a decade, most of what we consider the sum of human knowledge would be lost. Even if some hard drives survived, who would know how to read them? The technology to access digital storage requires computers, operating systems, software, and electrical power. If the infrastructure to produce and maintain those systems collapsed, the data might as well not exist. Future generations would hold devices filled with information but lack the tools to retrieve it. The same is true for books. We print fewer books now than we did a generation ago. Most modern publishing is digital. E-books, online articles, PDFs stored in the cloud. If the servers die, those texts vanish instantly. The physical books that remain would survive longer, but paper decays. Especially in humid climates. Within a few centuries, most books would be unreadable pulp. What about the knowledge stored in human minds? The engineers who understand how power grids work. The doctors who know how to perform surgery, the farmers who know when to plant and harvest, the programmers who can write code. If those people died without teaching the next generation, their knowledge would die with them. In a true collapse scenario, survival becomes the priority. No one has time to teach calculus when they are struggling to find food and clean water. Specialization disappears. The blacksmith who also knew poetry forgets the poetry. The doctor who also studied history abandons history to focus on healing. Within 2 generations, most specialized knowledge is lost. What remains are the skills necessary for survival. How to grow food, how to purify water, how to make fire, how to defend against threats. Humanity does not go extinct. We are too adaptable for that, too resilient, too capable of surviving in harsh conditions, but we regress, we simplify, we forget. And within a few centuries, the survivors would be living lives that look nothing like ours. No computers, no cars, no electricity. Just small communities struggling to rebuild from fragments. This is not speculation. This has happened before. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, Europe entered what historians call the Dark Ages. Not because people became stupid, but because the systems that preserved and transmitted knowledge broke down. Trade routes collapsed. Cities were abandoned. Literacy rates plummeted. Libraries burned. Schools closed. For over 500 years, most of the knowledge accumulated during the classical period was lost to Western Europe. The works of Greek philosophers survived only because they were preserved in the Islamic world and later translated back into Latin. Engineering techniques used to build Roman aqueducts and roads were forgotten. It took 1,000 years for Europe to regain the level of infrastructure and learning it had during the height of the Roman Empire. And Rome was not destroyed by a comet or a supervolcano. It collapsed gradually over centuries due to economic decline, military overextension, and political instability. Imagine what would happen if the collapse were sudden. If a solar flare knocked out every electrical grid on Earth in a single day. If a pandemic killed 90% of the population within a year. If an asteroid impact triggered a volcanic winter that lasted a decade. The survivors would have no time to preserve knowledge. No ability to maintain the systems we depend on. They would revert to subsistence living within months, and within a generation, most of what we know would be gone. This is the fragility at the heart of modern civilization. We have built a world that depends on complexity, supply chains that span continents, technologies that require rare materials and specialized manufacturing. Systems so interconnected that the failure of one part cascades through the whole. In 1977, a blackout in New York City lasted 25 hours. Looting began within hours. Fires spread across neighborhoods. Over 3,000 people were arrested. The city descended into chaos in a single night. And that was just one city losing power for one day. In 2003, a blackout across the northeastern United States and parts of Canada affected 55 million people. It lasted 2 days in most areas. Hospitals relied on backup generators, water treatment plants struggled to function, traffic lights went dark, causing gridlock, grocery stores could not refrigerate food, gas stations could not pump fuel. For 2 days, a significant portion of North America experienced what life without electricity feels like. Now imagine that blackout lasting not 2 days but 2 years. Imagine it affecting not one region but the entire planet. That is what a severe solar storm could do, and it has happened before. In 1859, a massive solar flare struck the Earth. The event, known as the Carrington Event, caused telegraph systems across Europe and North America to fail. Some telegraph operators reported receiving electric shocks. Papers caught fire. The aurora borealis was visible as far south as the Caribbean. At the time, humanity did not depend on electricity. The damage was minimal, but if a Carrington-level event occurred today, the results would be catastrophic. Transformers in power grids would overload and burn out. Satellites would be damaged or destroyed. GPS systems would fail. Communication networks would collapse. And because modern transformers are custom-built and take months to manufacture, repairing the grid would take years. NASA estimates that a severe solar storm has a 12% chance of occurring in any given decade. That means there is a significant possibility that within our lifetimes, we will experience an event that could knock out electrical infrastructure globally for months or years. What happens to a world without electricity? Hospitals lose power, water treatment plants stop functioning, sewage systems back up, refrigeration fails and food spoils, gas stations cannot pump fuel, banks cannot process transactions, the internet goes dark. Within weeks, supply chains collapse. Within months, millions die from starvation, disease, and violence. The survivors would not have the luxury of preserving knowledge. They would be too busy trying to survive. And by the time stability returned, most of what we knew would be lost. This is not the only threat. The Earth sits beneath a sky filled with rocks. Asteroids and comets left over from the formation of the solar system. Most are small, harmless, but some are large enough to cause extinction-level events. 66 million years ago, an asteroid 10 kilometers wide ended the age of dinosaurs. If an object that size struck today, it would end the age of humans. We are watching the sky now. NASA and other space agencies track near-Earth objects. They have cataloged thousands of asteroids that cross Earth's orbit. Most pose no immediate threat. But new objects are discovered regularly, and some approach without warning. In 2013, a meteor exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia. It was 20 meters wide and released energy equivalent to 30 Hiroshima bombs. No one saw it coming. A larger object, just a few hundred meters across, could destroy a city. An object a few kilometers wide could trigger a global catastrophe. We have no proven method to deflect such an object. No defense, no plan beyond hope that we detect it early enough to attempt something. Then there are supervolcanoes. Beneath Yellowstone National Park in the United States lies a volcanic system capable of an eruption 1,000 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens. The last supereruption occurred 640,000 years ago. It covered half of North America in ash. If it erupted today, it would bury states under meters of volcanic debris. Ash would enter the atmosphere and block sunlight for years. Global temperatures would plummet, crops would fail, billions would starve. The Toba supervolcano in Indonesia erupted 74,000 years ago. Genetic evidence suggests that the human population crashed to as few as 10,000 individuals. We nearly went extinct. The survivors were scattered, isolated, struggling to rebuild, and it took tens of thousands of years for humanity to recover. We are overdue for another supereruption. Yellowstone, Toba, the Phlegraean Fields in Italy, all are active, all could erupt with little warning. And if one does, the world as we know it ends. But perhaps the most immediate threat is ourselves. We have built weapons capable of destroying civilization in hours. Nuclear arsenals containing thousands of warheads, each one more powerful than the bombs dropped on Japan. Enough combined firepower to render the planet uninhabitable. During the Cold War, we came close to using them. In 1983, a Soviet early warning system detected incoming missiles from the United States. The officer on duty, Stanislav Petrov, had minutes to decide whether to report the attack and trigger a nuclear response. He chose to wait, to assume it was a false alarm. It was a computer glitch caused by sunlight reflecting off clouds. But if Petrov had followed protocol, the world would have ended that day. We like to believe we are rational, that we would never destroy ourselves, but history shows otherwise. Civilizations collapse, empires fall, wars consume entire regions, and often the collapse is self-inflicted, resources depleted, environments degraded. Populations outgrowing their capacity to sustain themselves. The ancient Maya are a cautionary tale. At their peak, they built sprawling cities in the jungles of Central America. Temples, observatories, agricultural systems supporting millions, but they overextended. They deforested the land for agriculture and construction. They exhausted the soil. When droughts came, their food production collapsed. Cities were abandoned. The population crashed. By the time Spanish conquistadors arrived, the great Mayan cities were already ruins. The Maya did not disappear. Their descendants live throughout Central America today. But the civilization they built, the knowledge they accumulated, the cities they constructed, all of that was lost. The survivors forgot how to read their own writing. The glyphs carved into temple walls became indecipherable. It took modern archaeologists over a century to decode the Mayan script, and even now much of it remains mysterious. If the Maya, with their sophisticated understanding of astronomy and mathematics, could lose their knowledge within a few generations, what makes us think we are immune? We assume that our technology makes us invincible, that we have conquered nature, that we have moved beyond the cycles of rise and fall that consumed earlier civilizations. But we have not. We have simply built a more complex system, and the more complex a system, the more fragile it becomes. A subsistence farmer can survive the collapse of a government. They grow their own food, they know how to purify water, they understand the land. But a software engineer in a modern city, without electricity, without supply chains, without the infrastructure that delivers food and water, they are helpless. This is the paradox of progress. The more advanced we become, the more dependent we are on the systems that sustain us. And those systems are far more vulnerable than we like to admit. So what happens when the world ends? When the power goes out and does not come back on? When the supply chains collapse and the grocery stores empty? When violence spreads and governments fail? Some people survive. The ones who live in rural areas, the ones who know how to grow food and hunt and purify water, the ones who have skills that do not depend on technology. They form small communities, they defend their resources. They pass down knowledge orally because there is no time or material to write, and within a few generations they forget. They forget about skyscrapers and airplanes, about the internet and satellites, about everything that made the old world modern. What remains are stories, myths about the time before, when people could fly through the sky, when they could speak to someone on the other side of the world, when light came from walls without fire. Future generations would hear these stories and think they are myths. Exaggerations? Fairy tales? They would not believe that their ancestors built towers that scraped the heavens or machines that carried them faster than sound. Because the evidence would be gone, buried, rusted, returned to dust. That is how knowledge is lost, not dramatically. Not all at once, but gradually. One generation forgetting what the previous one knew. One skill abandoned because it is no longer necessary. One book left unread because survival takes priority. And yet some knowledge does survive, not the complex systems, not the specialized sciences, but the practical wisdom, how to read the stars, how to predict the weather, how to make tools from stone and wood, how to heal wounds with plants. The knowledge that humans carried for thousands of years before civilization. The knowledge encoded in myth and ritual and oral tradition. Perhaps that is what the ancients were trying to preserve. Not just the facts, but the methods. Not just what they knew, but how they knew it. Not instructions for rebuilding technology, but principles for surviving collapse. How to read the sky, how to align structures to the sun, how to encode information in symbols that transcend language, because they knew the world ends, they knew civilizations fall, they knew that everything built can be destroyed, and so they left warnings, carved into stone, hidden in myth, encoded in monuments that would outlast everything else. They were preparing us not for progress, for survival, for the moment when the complexity collapses and humanity must begin again. With only fragments, with only memory, with only the knowledge that the world has ended before and will end again. And when that moment comes, when the lights go out and the systems fail and the old world crumbles, we will understand what the ancients were trying to tell us. That survival is not about technology. It is about knowledge, knowledge that can be passed down without books or computers, knowledge that can survive catastrophe, knowledge carved into the earth itself. The wind moves through empty cities, through towers built to touch the sky, through monuments raised in defiance of time, and in the silence there is a question, not whether the world will end, but whether we will be ready when it does. The desert wind passes over Göbekli Tepe before dawn. The air is cool. The stones stand silent. 11,000 years they have waited. 11,000 years since hands shaped them. Hands that have been dust for longer than memory can hold. Beneath the sand, beneath the layers of deliberate burial, the pillars wait. Carved with animals that no longer walk the earth, aligned to stars that have shifted position since the stones were raised. They were not built for the people who carved them. Those people already knew. They were built for us, for the people who would come after, the people who would forget, the people who would need to remember. Memory is fragile. A single generation can forget everything, but stone remembers, stone endures. When everything else has turned to dust, when the names are lost and the languages are dead and the cities are buried, the stones remain, standing, waiting, whispering secrets to anyone willing to listen. What if the ancients knew this? What if they understood in ways we are only beginning to grasp that the world moves in cycles, that what rises must fall? That knowledge, no matter how sophisticated, can be lost in a single catastrophic moment. Perhaps that is why they built in stone, why they aligned their monuments to the stars, why they encoded their knowledge not in words that could be misunderstood or languages that could be forgotten, but in geometry, in ratios, in alignments that transcend culture and time. The Great Pyramid does not need translation. Its dimensions speak in mathematics. The ratios are there for anyone to measure. Pi, the golden ratio. The distance from the Earth to the Sun encoded in its height. These are not accidents. They are messages. Messages that say we knew, we understood, we were here. And perhaps the message is also a warning, a reminder that the people who built these monuments were not primitive. Not ignorant, not stumbling blindly toward civilization. They were survivors, survivors of something so catastrophic that it erased almost everything that came before. And they built these structures not to celebrate their achievements but to preserve what they had managed to save. The flood myths tell the same story. Not one culture, not one continent, but over 200 cultures across the entire earth, all remembering water, all remembering destruction. All remembering that the world ended and began again. For centuries we dismissed these as myth, as religious allegory, as exaggerated memories of local disasters, but geology confirms it. Sea levels rose 120 meters at the end of the last ice age. Coastlines vanished beneath the waves. Entire landscapes drowned. And because humans live near water, because we build our cities along rivers and coasts, most of human settlement 12,000 years ago now lies underwater. We have barely begun to search for it. The continental shelves, the submerged coastlines, the drowned river valleys, beneath the silt and sand of 10,000 years, what lies waiting? What cities, what monuments, what evidence of civilizations we never knew existed? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps the flood myths are exactly what they seem. Memories of a climate catastrophe that destroyed hunter-gatherer communities and forced the survivors to start over. Or perhaps something more. Perhaps beneath the waves there are structures, temples, harbors, cities built by people who understood astronomy and mathematics and engineering. People whose knowledge was inherited by the Sumerians and the Egyptians and the Maya. People whose names are lost but whose legacy survives in the sudden appearance of civilization where there should have been only gradual development. We do not know, not yet, but the question is no longer absurd. The question is geology. It is archaeology. It is the slow, patient work of searching for evidence in places we have not yet looked. And if we find it, if we discover beneath the waves the ruins of an advanced civilization destroyed at the end of the Ice Age, everything changes. Our history becomes longer, our memory becomes deeper, and the myths we dismissed as primitive fantasy become something else entirely. Testimony, documentation, the last words of a world that knew it was ending. But even if we never find physical proof, even if the ocean keeps its secrets, the pattern remains. Sophisticated knowledge appearing suddenly, mathematical systems already complete, astronomical observations requiring centuries of data, engineering precision that defies explanation, and everywhere the same phrase repeated across cultures and millennia. This knowledge was given. It was taught. It was inherited, not invented, inherited. The ancients did not claim to be the first. They claimed to be the ones who remembered. And if they were right, if the knowledge is older than the civilizations that recorded it, then we are not the pinnacle of human achievement. We are not the first to understand the stars or split the atom or decode the structure of life. We are simply the latest. The most recent iteration in a cycle that has repeated before and will repeat again. That is the message carved into stone. That is the warning encoded in myth. That is the truth whispered by ruins buried beneath sand and sea. The world has ended before. It will end again, not because the universe is cruel, not because we are cursed, but because that is the nature of time, of geology, of the forces that shape planets and climates and the conditions necessary for life. Stars explode. Asteroids collide, volcanoes erupt, ice ages come and go, magnetic poles reverse. The sun flares, the climate shifts. These are not punishments, they are patterns. Natural rhythms playing out across scales so vast that human lifetimes cannot perceive them, but civilizations can if they last long enough. If they observe carefully enough, if they pass down knowledge across generations, they begin to see the patterns, the cycle, the rhythm of creation and destruction written in the movements of the heavens. Perhaps that is what the precession of the equinoxes meant to the ancients, not just an astronomical curiosity but a clock, a way of measuring time across ages, a way of knowing where they were in the great cycle, and a way of predicting when the next turn would come. We are near the end of one half cycle now. The spring equinox sun is moving from Pisces into Aquarius, halfway around the wheel. The same transition point that ancient astronomers marked as significant. Does that mean catastrophe is coming? Does it mean the world will end in our lifetimes or in the lifetimes of our children? No one knows. The cycles are too long, the data too incomplete, the mechanisms too complex, but the possibility is there, written in geology, encoded in myth, confirmed by the evidence of previous collapses, and ignored by a civilization that believes it has transcended the cycles that consumed everyone who came before. We build towers of glass and steel. We send machines to other planets. We decode genomes and split atoms and manipulate matter at the molecular level. And we believe in the quiet arrogance of progress that we are immune, that we have conquered nature, that the rules that applied to the Maya and the Romans and the civilizations whose names we do not even know do not apply to us. But the Earth does not care about our arrogance. The sun does not care about our technology. The asteroid drifting through the void does not care about our achievements. The forces that shape worlds operate on timescales and magnitudes that render human civilization irrelevant. We are not immune, we are not special, we are simply here, now, in this brief moment between the last catastrophe and the next, and the question is not whether the world will end. The question is what we will do with the time we have, whether we will learn from the past, whether we will preserve what matters. Whether we will leave behind something more than ruins for future generations to puzzle over. The ancients understood this. They knew their time was limited. They knew the world could end suddenly. And so they carved their knowledge into stone. They aligned their monuments to the stars. They passed down stories through ritual and song. They did everything they could to ensure that what they knew would survive them. Not for themselves, for us, for the people who would come after, for the ones who would need to start over. For the generation that would live in the wreckage of the old world and need to know that humanity had risen before. That is the gift they left us. Not answers, not certainty, but memory. The knowledge that we have been here before, that we have built great things and lost them. That we have survived catastrophe and rebuilt from fragments. That we are part of a story longer and stranger than anything we were taught in school. And if we are wise, we will leave the same gift for those who come after us. We will encode our knowledge in forms that can survive collapse, in monuments, in symbols, in simple principles that do not require electricity or computers to understand. We will teach our children not just what we know but how we know it. We will preserve the methods, the questions, the curiosity that drives us to look at the stars and ask where we came from, because the world will end. Perhaps not today, perhaps not in our lifetimes, but eventually. The forces are too great. The cycles too inevitable, the history too consistent. And when it does, when the lights go out and the systems fail and the complexity collapses, the survivors will need something to hold on to. Not technology, not infrastructure, but knowledge, simple, practical, encoded in stories and stone. They will need to know that the stars can guide them, that the seasons follow patterns, that water can be purified and crops can be grown and tools can be made from what the earth provides. They will need to know that their ancestors were not savages but sophisticated people who understood the world deeply. And they will need to know that they are not alone, that others have stood where they stand, that humanity has faced extinction before and survived, that the world has ended and begun again. That memory, even when everything else is lost, endures. The wind passes over the ruins one last time. It carries dust that may have once been temples, grains of sand that were once stones carefully shaped by hands that understood geometry and astronomy and the fragility of knowledge. Beneath that dust, beneath the ruins, memory waits. Memory pressed into clay. Memory carved into stone, memory encoded in myths that outlasted empires, memory in the alignment of monuments to stars that have shifted but still shine. The Sumerians called it restoration, not invention, restoration. The recovery of what was before, not the creation of something new. And if that is true, if we are restoring rather than inventing, if the knowledge we are rediscovering was known before and lost and is now being found again, then everything changes. We are not moving forward into an unknown future. We are moving in circles, returning to knowledge that was always there, waiting to be remembered. The desert wind moves through Göbekli Tepe, through the drowned cities beneath the sea. Through the pyramids standing silent under stars that have watched empires rise and fall and rise again. And in that wind, if you listen carefully, you can hear them. The voices of the people who came before, the ones who built and knew and remembered, the ones who left warnings carved into stone because they understood what we are only beginning to grasp, that the world ends, and that memory, patient as stone, survives. We return now to where we began, to the present moment, wherever you are listening. Whatever hour you are keeping, the past whispers through fragments of clay and stone, through myths we dismissed and ruins we are only beginning to understand. But we are here, present, alive, still asking questions. Still wondering what came before and what lessons might be waiting in the dust. That capacity to wonder, to seek, to remember what was forgotten. That is what makes us human. That is what connects us across millennia to the people who carved the first stones and aligned the first temples and told the first stories about worlds that ended and began again. If this journey through deep time has resonated with you, if these questions pull at something inside you, take a moment. Press the like button. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring these mysteries that sleep between history and myth. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Helps ensure that the questions continue to be asked, that the memory continues to be passed down. And perhaps that is the real message hidden in the ancient stones. Not just what happened, not just that the world ended before, but that someone cared enough to write it down, to carve it into monuments that would outlast them, to preserve it, to send it forward through time to us. We do the same now, in our own way, asking questions, seeking evidence, sharing what we find, keeping the memory alive for the next generation. For the people who will come after us and need to know that they are part of a story longer than empires, deeper than written history, older than the oldest monuments still standing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for wondering with me. Thank you for being willing to consider possibilities that challenge everything we thought we knew about where we came from and how long we have been here. The world you know has ended before. The evidence is there, in stone, in myth, in drowned coastlines and buried temples, in knowledge that appeared too suddenly, in monuments aligned to stars, in stories told across continents by people who never met. And if it has ended before, it will end again, not as punishment, not as failure, but as part of the rhythm. The cycle, the great turning wheel of time that the ancients understood and we are only beginning to remember. When that moment comes, when the next age ends and the new one begins, may we leave behind something worth finding. Something that says we were here, we understood. We remembered and we tried to pass it on. Until the next mystery calls us back into the past, may your present be peaceful. May your questions lead you somewhere meaningful. May you rest knowing that the story continues. That memory endures. That knowledge, encoded in stone and symbol and story, waits for those brave enough to seek it. The wind passes over the ruins one last time, over Göbekli Tepe standing silent in the Turkish dawn, over the pyramids at Giza casting shadows across the sand, over Stonehenge marking the solstice, over the drowned cities beneath the waves, over every place where the ancients left their mark and their warning and their hope. And memory, patient as stone, eternal as the stars, waits for the next person brave enough to ask, has the world ended before? Yes. Will it end again? Yes, but will we remember? That is the question the stones are asking. That is the question carved into monuments that have stood for 10,000 years. That is the question whispered in myths that have survived longer than empires. Will we remember? The answer depends on us, on whether we listen, on whether we preserve, on whether we pass down not just what we know but the capacity to wonder, to question, to seek, to remember. The world has ended many times before us. It will end many times after, but the story continues. The memory endures. The knowledge waits. And as long as there are people willing to ask, willing to listen, willing to look at the ruins and the myths and the stars and wonder what came before, the ancients will not have left their warnings in vain. Good night.